Taken from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9. We will be reading from verse 30 to 37. Mark, chapter 9, verse 30. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." And he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his hand, in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." This is the word of the God, of the Lord. In 2012, I was appointed by Bishop Warner Brown to pastor a Cantonese Methodist church in Sacramento. After the appointment, a colleague of mine kindly suggested to me that I learn how to play mahjong. My colleague was under the impression that mahjong is the most popular game among the Cantonese people. I think he was correct. But guess what? I did not take the advice. I didn't learn how to play mahjong because I play bridge. One cannot divide his attention between two games, doesn't he? In fact, I think I'm pretty good at bridge. Let me tell you a story to prove that I know this game well. About 50 years ago, the Bridge World magazine, actually the oldest, continuously published bridge magazine in the world, not just in this country, Bridge World, started in 1929. 50 years ago, Bridge World magazine asked 100 top experts of the time, asking them to identify, to vote, to name, the best, the greatest bridge player of the world, the best bridge player of the world. The surprise was that the question received precisely 100 different answers, asking 100 top experts of the world to name the best player of the world. But that question received precisely 100 different answers. Guess what? Each expert named himself as the best bridge player of the world. The Bridge World magazine immediately realized that they made a big mistake. So they sent out a second question immediately, asking, who is the second best bridge player of the world? Second best. This time, Howard Schenken of the United States was the clear answer, because he received overwhelming consensus. He was considered the second best bridge player in the world. And he was the best. You and I know why those top experts cannot agree on, the number one player in the world, while they can agree on the number two. You and I know why. Because we all like to be the number one. We all like to win. The legendary football coach, Vince Lombardi, once said, winning is not everything. Winning is the only thing that is important. Jesus' disciples like to be the number one too. They like to win. After arrived at Capernaum, Jesus asked his disciples, what were you arguing about on the road? The Gospel of Mark says the disciples were silent. Well, because on the way, they had been arguing about who was the number one in the world, or the number one among them. This shows that the disciples were human, just like you and I are human. They wanted, they wanted their names to be in the light, just as you and I want our name to stand out. Who doesn't want to stand out among our peers? But wait, do you remember what Jesus said in chapter 8 of Mark? Today we are reading from chapter 9. But do you remember what Jesus said in chapter 8 of the same gospel? Jesus said, if any want to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. If any of you want to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Today's gospel lesson is taken from chapter 9. After Jesus had taught the disciples about self-denial, about denying yourself and take up the cross. After that teaching, Jesus asked them about what they were arguing about on the road. No wonder they were silent, because they were embarrassed. They recognized that there was an immense discrepancy between Jesus' self-denial and their own desire to become the number one. As you can imagine, Jesus realized what they were arguing about. When Jesus was asking them, Jesus already knew the answer. So Jesus called the disciples together again and taught them, actually repeated to them pretty much the same teaching. He said, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Now think about those words for a moment. If you want to be first, you must be last of all and servant of all. You say, hey, Pastor William, that cannot be right. The wisdom of this world says the greatest people are those who have the most servants. But no, Jesus said precisely the opposite. Unless you serve, you cannot be great. That was Jesus' teaching. I guess you know Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer spoke to a graduating class in an English boys' school back in 1935. He said to these graduating students, I do not know what your destiny will be. Some of you will perhaps occupy remarkable positions. Perhaps some of you will become famous by your pens or as artists. But I know only one thing. The only people among you who will be really happy, are those who have sought and found how to serve. The only people among you who will be really happy are those people who have sought, who have tried and found how to serve. And Albert Schweitzer lived out his own words. You know, he opened a hospital in the forest, and Lemberine in 1913. Where was Lemberine? Lemberine was in today's Gabon in Central Africa. In those days, it was in the midst of a forest, surrounded by all kinds of tall trees. The time was 1913. While serving there as a physician, as a doctor, Albert Schweitzer found himself hauling lumbers, hewing trees, dragging woods, and doing the work of a day laborers while serving the sick people as a physician. Serving the sick at the same time, he has to hew trees, drag woods, doing the daily chores. One day, Schweitzer observed, a gentleman, well-dressed gentleman visiting one of his patients. At the time, Albert Schweitzer was dragging wood. So he said to that gentleman, "Hello, friend, lend me a hand, will you?" The gentleman replied, "No, I'm an intellectual and I don't drag woods about." Albert Schweitzer replied, "Oh, you are very lucky. I too wanted to become an intellectual, but I did not succeed. I wanted to become an intellectual, but I did not succeed." Albert Schweitzer had 3 PhD degrees. And he said he wanted to become an intellectual, but he did not succeed. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Many Christians today are trying to follow Jesus in the top floor penthouse of a luxurious hotel. Penthouse, serving people in the top floor penthouse of a luxurious hotel. Many people are trying to follow Jesus that way. Albert Schweitzer was not one of them. By leaving out his own words, the only thing you will find happiness in this world is to try and find ways to serve people. By leaving out those words and also the words of Jesus, Albert Schweitzer tried to follow Jesus in the basement, not top floor penthouse, in the basement. Brothers and sisters, Albert Schweitzer did not invent that idea, following Jesus in the basement. Jesus invented that idea. Because we believe Jesus is the form of God, the human form of God. When Jesus, become human in the form of a human, as a servant of all, Jesus invented the idea of serving people in the basement. And that is what Jesus is trying to tell us today in the Gospel of Mark. Not only chapter 8, but chapter 9 also. And if you follow the reading, you will find Jesus pretty much address the same teaching again in chapter 10. So 8, 9, 10, 3 times. Jesus emphasized this very idea of serving people by denying yourself, taking up the cross. So if you want to be the number one, commit your life to serving the least and the lowest. This is Jesus' teaching. If you want to follow Jesus, I guess basement is where you shall be. No other place. You can only start serving people, following Jesus in the basement. Amen. I will turn to the